Well, it's October the 6th, the 48th anniversary of the beginning of the Yom Kippur War. Well, at any rate, thought I'd make that comment. But today I want to talk about something that is more about war than about what I've been talking about most of my latest videos. I've been discussing, of course, what's going on with the whole economic situation in this country and these bills the Democrats have. But today I want to get to something else that's brewing that hasn't been getting near, but it's kind of significant. And that is that, first of all, let's just look at the situation with China and Taiwan. I mean, there's an escalating set of incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone by increasing numbers of Chinese military aircraft. I think they've grown in numbers. I think one of them yesterday may have been as high as 50 aircraft have been challenging the air defense zone of Taiwan. In other words, and these kind of maneuvers are useful in preparation for war. In fact, I did mention the Arab-Israeli War of '73 at the beginning here, and that's how that surprise attack was carried out on Israel, is by continually moving up to the position of where you were getting ready to jump off, and then not doing it until you've eventually lured your victim to sleep to where they can't afford to react anymore, and then you hit them with the real attack. I don't say that China is necessarily going to invade Taiwan or attack them even from air, but this is becoming an increasingly serious situation. And it's part of an ongoing pattern of developments in the world ever since Biden came into office, which are slowly starting to, in my opinion, spin out of control. Because if you're an aggressor in the world and you see a weak president like Biden, you kind of think after the Trump period, this might be the time to actually do something. While the Americans are tied down with all their internal squabbles and the pandemic and everything else, it could be the time that they might decide to do something. And that's kind of what I'm discussing today. But if you like these videos, remember to give me a like because it helps with the algorithm. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And if you want notification, of course, you can ring the bell. And here's one of the problems I'm beginning to look at for Taiwan's defense. On the one hand, it's unclear to me that China actually has the amphibious capability to actually invade Taiwan. I've looked at a variety of different sources on this. And remember, Taiwan has a pretty good army for self-defense. And I think if you think in terms of it's an operation on the level of a D-Day invasion, essentially to pull it off in a classical sense. On the other hand, there's other things I look at in the dynamics here that makes it look pretty bad for Taiwan. One thing is the fact that the Chinese have bought the Russian S-400 air defense system, which has been much vaunted out there. Now, this is actually, a system is the right word for this thing. It's a whole series of different radars with different capabilities, and also a whole 5 different types of missiles are tied into it. And the longest range ones have ranges up to 250 miles, okay? The shortest one, I think, is like 40. And then there's certainly significant ones of 100 and I think 160 in the middle, which are particularly interesting. Because those missiles can actually blanket from the Chinese mainland the whole nation of Taiwan. Okay, which may mean that as soon as their airplanes get off the ground and start climbing to any altitude, something very unfriendly and fairly fast could be coming their way from China. So it makes it a lot more difficult for them to actually defend themselves. Now, the actual tactics of doing this in combination with Chinese air assaults is a little, it requires a little bit of, let's say, orchestration or maybe choreographing, but I think it can be done. And I mean, one thing, of course, the Chinese have to watch out for be accidentally shooting down their own airplanes when you have both fighters in the air and you're launching long-range interceptors at the same time. Remember, these systems were designed during the Soviet period, basically, as a strategic defense systems against the U.S. intercontinental bombers. Okay, and remember, and so early on, everything was done with fixed site systems, but eventually what they evolved into was mobile systems, because obviously we could use ICBM warheads or SLBM warheads to blow up their integrated air defense system on the ground, and then the bombers could sweep through and be dropping larger payloads on major targets with pinpoint accuracy. So they then went to these mobile systems, which are quite capable. I mean, the one thing you have to say about the Russians is they put a lot of emphasis in air defense more than we have, and while they're one might have been a little bit snarky about the earlier efforts, such as the SA-2 that we faced in Vietnam. It turns out that in more recent years they've been quite much more successful. These things are kind of dangerous, and so now at the same time I'm seeing other things developing. The U.S. is deploying more forces in terms of naval. And we're also, and now I'm thinking about how to deploy more air forces into that Pacific region. Of course, that's a problem for us for ground-based air forces because, short of putting them in Taiwan, and as I point out, maybe that isn't such a good idea anyhow, we're back to Guam, for instance, or maybe Okinawa or something. So you begin to see this is, or of course, we have Korean bases. So this is an interesting issue here, and how do we handle it? At the same time, of course, I'm now hearing that Japan is thinking about how do they react with military capabilities if the Taiwanese assault were to actually occur. And so what I'm illustrating here is, and warning everybody about, is that while we've been focused on our own situation, which is scary enough, and I've been hitting that pretty heavily, there's an international situation brewing which isn't too good. Now let's go to another theater. Iran. Iran is right on the verge of being able to produce nuclear weapons, and they already have missiles to deliver them with, which could cover a good part of not just the Middle East, but even into Europe, of course. And eventually, they're, of course, working on building an ICBM, which could hit the U.S., too. And so, I mean, they are have enriched uranium at least up to 60%, and they're actually blocking the international inspectors from the sites that they were monitoring it with. And when you're at 60% enrichment, going up to 90 or 93 range for nuclear, weapon grade material is not that big of a stretch. Only a few more cycles. So they're very much on the verge of actually having nuclear weapons. And in fact, I think if they don't already have it, what's really holding them back is just a political decision. Do they want to do that yet and maybe risk more international sanctions, or do they want to just simply hang the threat out there to increase their negotiation leverage? But again, it now appears that Israel has been using bases in Azerbaijan to fly drones in and potentially attack targets inside of Iran. And Iran is threatening the country of Azerbaijan, and also Turkey, I think, is more aligned with Azerbaijan and a little bit more hostile to Iran, whereas Armenia, from historic perspectives, is more aligned with Iran against Azerbaijan. So here's another situation that's developing. We already know about the situation in Afghanistan, which terrorism is kind of going to be able to grow, and there's potential border clashes with Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, and we don't know how the Russians are going to play into that. Also, the Chinese are involved. So, then of course we have the normal Middle East situation with Israel and the various Palestinian groups and the various rocket attacks and that sort of thing. There's also the Russians seem to be consolidating their power inside of Syria by attacking forces aligned with both Turkey and with Iran. And also, they're showing that there's a questionable capability. These missiles I discussed, these defense missiles, like we're talking, I believe, mostly S-300, a predecessor system, still a very capable system, has been intercepting Israeli missiles that have been launched from aircraft, either F-15s or 16s, I believe, in there, which goes to show that Israel is being very cautious about penetrating the airspace because of these defense systems, which are proving fairly effective. Now, we haven't heard if they've made a run on them with F-35s yet or not, and probably if they have, I suspect that this is being held close to the vest. But I'm sure they don't want to have an F-35 shot down and fall into the hands of the Russians here, right? So I'm sure the U.S. is probably putting a little squeeze on them over that issue too. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is that the whole world situation is looking to me to becoming increasingly dangerous and chaotic. Given our own economic problems here, I mean, our spending is already out of control. And the other thing, going back to China rather quickly also, is that China is having some apparently major economic problems with their real estate market. As I understand it, a lot of the people in China have been investing in real estate because they really don't have quite the same financial instruments that we do for the common folks, and not common, but I guess we're talking about what would be a more upper scale people. I suspect a lot of them are probably party members too. So there may be a bit of a political crisis brewing internally to China too. And of course, that's always a bad situation when you have an authoritarian regime that might seek to go to war to distract from an internal political problem. And who knows, maybe the United States has the same problem too here, huh? You see what I'm getting at here? This world situation to me is starting to look a little bit on the scary side, and I just thought I'd kind of put out this warning to everybody, and we'll just have to monitor this as it goes on. And in conclusion here, I'll make a few comments. Like I said, I've been following the whole budget battle and the maneuvers going on. I refer you to my previous video if you want to know what I think about this, because it's looking to me increasingly like the warning I was putting out in that video a few minutes into it about the strategies that the Republicans are using, I think are misguided, particularly on this debt limit thing. I think we're risking losing a lot over this. Not so much, I'm not talking about votes, I'm talking about power. I mean, if the Democrats start eating away at the, you got to be careful that you don't do anything that unites all the Democrats to overcome the filibuster. And blowing up the whole financial system might be the one thing that would do it. So I think you got to be very, very careful there. I think it's time to cut a deal on the debt limit. That's me, but everybody else, we'll see who's right here, me or McConnell. If McConnell succeeds in killing the entire Democrat program with his maneuver, and we keep the filibuster intact, then he's right. If the Democrats end the filibuster even marginally in order to pass a debt limit increase, then I think he totally messed up. Okay, I'll close this for now, and like I say, if my addresses to my social media are below on Twitter, Gab, and Parler, and I'll post there somewhat. And until next time,